Everyone gather around. I was laughing in my own head yesterday that probably 5 minutes into our workshop, lots of people started to join. Does anyone want to know why? Think. Because everyone was expecting this to be on Facebook, yes? And it wasn't being broadcast to Facebook, so people quickly came onto Zoom. I'm happy you're all here through Zoom. I'm checking in with our team. We're ready to begin formally? Okay. Hari Om, and welcome to the Happiness Series 5. I'm offering my greetings to all of you from Niagara Falls, Canada. I'm happy to see all of you who are connecting through Zoom and those who I can't see through YouTube. I'm happy to feel you. This is our community. We are forever coming to unity. I've shared with you where I'm communing to you from. I would like for you to share with me, with all, where are you communing from? However, I want you to think of all of the places in the world. What feels most like home to you? Many of you grew up in a city and now you're living in a different city. Please share in the chat what place in the world feels most like home to you. For me, one of the places is Niagara Falls. I was born here. I was raised here. I live here. I was married here. My kids were born here. And seekers are sharing the Netherlands, Portland, Raleigh, Oakville, where I am now, well shared, Connecticut, the Chicagoland. Now tell me, how is your head? You've told me about your home. How are you right now? What are you feeling? What are you thinking? Share with me, share with everyone. I told you I'm excited. I'm happy to see all of you. Content, grateful, clear. Toronto. Someone is thinking Toronto right now. Enthusiastic. Not looking forward to cleaning up today. That was yesterday. Now we can continue back with our disorganization. I'm going to begin our workshop today with a story. This story is called The 10 Disciples. A guide, a guru, was very pleased with her students, with her shishyas, and so she organized a picnic for them. And she told all of them, I'm going ahead to set up the sheets and the food, and you all close up the monastery and you join me. So the guide leaves and all of the disciples, they wrap up at the monastery and they start to go to this picnic area. And they're all excited. The sun is shining, and they have to cross a river to get to this picnic area. And most of them are strong swimmers, so they carry the food on their head and their sacks, and they swim through this river, and they get to the other side. And they're drying off, and one of them has a concern. Most of us are good swimmers, but what if someone got left behind? What if someone drowned? Now everyone became concerned. So one of the disciples volunteered, "Let me count." So she starts to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So everyone's even more concerned now. We started with 10 and now there's 9. So another disciple says, "Maybe you miscounted. Let me count." So she starts to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Now everyone is deeply saddened. They start to cry that one of them has drowned. They were going to this picnic and they've died. Now the guide, she's waiting for this picnic. She's hungry. And no one comes. So she starts to trace her steps back to the ashram, and she sees all of her disciples crying, and she overhears them talking about how they started off as 10 and now there's 9 and one had drowned. So she shows up with a smile and asks, "What's the problem?" And they share, and she says, "Let me count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. One of the disciples who was counting was not counting themselves. Now you're all smiling and laughing. We've heard this story. We already know the answer. We're ahead of you. Slow down. Step back and think that this story is not about counting and drowning and so on. It's about finding happiness. Every one of us is wanting to find happiness, and we're looking everywhere other than ourselves. So we're laughing at these disciples who are crying, but really, we're laughing at ourselves. And this is so evident. I'm sure you've read or you've heard from me that the average child laughs 300 times a day. And the average adult laughs 15 times a day. And I always stipulate a lot of that laughing is just for money. You know, those polite laughs to make another person feel good, to sell something. Why is it that we smile so little, that we laugh so little? We have forgotten how to be happy. And so the happiness series is a workshop not so much about learning, but rather about unlearning that the source of happiness is not you. Unlearning is difficult. Tomorrow, instead of calling me or feeling that my name is Vivekji, I want you to change it to Vicharaji. Okay? It'll be very difficult for you, especially for those who we've known each other for decades. That will be very difficult. And that's why the culture of the happiness series is simplicity. That which is simple is more manageable in terms of remembering. We have to start to remember that we are the source of our happiness. And the second cultural aspect of the happiness series is support. We are a community. And whatever we're remembering, we are to practice this together. Happiness is a subjective experience. The happiness series is a subjective science, there is lots in life that someone else can do for you. Like a ritual can be done by proxy. Can feeling happiness be done by proxy? I've observed in our day, when we see people who are stressed out or feeling sad within, we don't question them at all. But if we see someone who's happy, that's so confusing to us. What's wrong with you? Correct? When we see people who are happy, that makes us less happy. But this is subjective, which means we have to practice. And when we're practicing together, this becomes more manageable, it becomes more realistic. The first 4 happiness series, the recordings for these are all on Facebook. My personal page, Chinmaya Mission Niagara's page. The happiness series that we're flowing through right now is about our lifestyle. And today, we are going to immerse ourselves in Sattva, or integrity. Now, before we do this, I'm going to review what we immersed ourselves in day 1, which was Satsanga, or inclusivity. I'd given all of you a reference from the Ramayana. Chapter 1, verse 3, Binu Satsanga Vivekana Hoy, which means, by associating with those who are noble, we come to understand and appreciate what is important. My master, Swami Tejomayananda, has shared, he taught us, the personality who introduces you to satsang is your best friend. Think of all of the friends you have in life. Your best friend is the one who brings you to satsang, to this association with the one who is noble, with those who are noble. Why? Because we come to understand and appreciate what's important. We stop living instinctively and we start to live intentionally. That's a game changer in our lives. Think about how happy we are when we are included. Whether it's a team or a party or a project. Now we'll only be included by someone who feels that sense of security. Nobility is equivalent to one who is secure, and so they practice inclusivity. And if you think about this authentically and deeply, this inclusivity, another word for this is yoga. Yoga means to unite, yes? And this shows that yoga is a vision, it is not a pose. Before we can practice inclusivity, we first have to feel this sense of being included. And the 3 ways to practice this in our lifestyle. Number 1, associate with noble people. Thinking about this some more, every one of us has grown out of certain articles and grown into other articles. Like shoes, correct? You grew out of shoes and grew into shoes. Agreed? Every one of us has grown out of circumstances and grown into different circumstances. For many of us, when we were younger, all we wanted to do was travel. And now that we're older, all we want to do is not travel. Yes? The same mentality is to be accepted in reference to beings. It is okay, it is healthy to grow out of certain relationships and to grow into certain relationships. And this is most applicable in terms of friends. Your life is precious. Don't allow those who are selfish, those who are exclusive, to harm you, to waste your life. Number 2, associate with noble people's ideas. I emphasized a lot yesterday about listening. Noble people's ideas, we don't input these just by listening, but also by seeing. Seeing how they live. And I can make this more societal in terms of what we watch on Netflix, on Apple TV, on cable. If what you're watching is making you think of others' lives more, then that's not helping you to be inclusive. But if what you're watching is making you think more about your life, where you came from, where you're going, then that is helping you to be more inclusive. Think about what you're watching. And finally, it is to associate with noble ideas. Who has these ideas now? Not people, but you. And every one of us should be honest that we fertilize our thoughts. If you have a negative thought and it keeps growing, why do you think it keeps growing? Because someone else is fertilizing that thought, or because you are? Can you all think about what I'm thinking about right now? I definitely can't think about what you're thinking about. See, with me, the chances are that I'm thinking about the happiness series. But with you, that chance is much different. So we fertilize our own thoughts. Don't fertilize the negative ones. Fertilize the positive ones. Satsanga, or inclusivity, we will know that we're flowing through this when we start to feel more secure. And we completed yesterday's workshop with all of us organizing our space. And when I say all of us, some of us were doing it, some of us were watching others organize their space. And we did this while listening to a beautiful presentation and beautiful music. I'm sure you got to feel Ashika's degree in psychology and music. That was her who was playing the piano. And as we transition now to new content, let us have a minute of quietude. Many of you are traveling, many of you are busy. Just be quiet. You don't have to change your seat. Sit where you are. Listen to the humming of your fridge. Take some notes. All those who are new to this community, you feel this is very awkward, don't you? You know, in this community, we do 50-hour silence retreats, correct? Sattva, or integrity. Another historical, philosophical text is called the Mahabharata. In the Mahabharata, there's a portion called Bhagavad-Gita. Chapter 14, verse 18, Shri Krishna is teaching Prince Arjuna. And he says, Urdhvam gachanti sattvastaha. Urdhvam gachanti sattvastaha, which in English means, the one who lives in sattva or quietness. Gachanti, they move, they evolve. Urdhvam. Urdhvam means higher. The one who lives by quietude is one who evolves to become higher. Now, I want to orient you a little bit towards this. In a subjective science, higher is equivalent to deeper. And that's true for an objective science too. If you're going to build a higher tower, you have to have a deeper foundation, correct? So higher, deeper, all this relates to integration. To integrate who you are. With satsanga, it's another that's integrated, and they are radiating that towards us. With sattva, we are trying to integrate ourselves. All of creation is built with certain characteristics. Every facet of creation is built with certain characteristics, such as, I'll reference food. If you eat foods that are based on animals, you will feel laziness. If you eat foods that are artificial, you will feel aggressiveness. If you eat foods that are plant-based, you will feel quietness. All food has these characteristics. Think about cars. A minivan is designed very differently than a sports car, correct? Just in terms of pickup speed. And then you have a Subaru. Correct? That's just built with a different characteristic too. Every vehicle has all-wheel drive. Sports. Baseball was designed to be listened to via radio. Football was designed to be watched via television. Basketball was designed to be experienced live. Every facet of creation has certain characteristics, and these characteristics, they have an effect on us. When we are exposed to a certain characteristic, it has an effect on us. When I had my dental checkup a couple of months ago, the hygienist was wearing this gadget on her wrist, and I asked her what it was, and she told me it's a dosimeter. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly, because she's exposed to so much radiation, so she has this meter. Because that radiation has an effect on her health, she has to check in with that. If you are around people who complain a lot, what happens to you? You start to complain too, correct? That exposure has an effect on us. Being honest that such exposure has an effect on us, I'll now shift into the framework for how we can practice sattva or integrity. Often, what is shared in our self-development maps is that we are conditioned by desha, vastu, and kala, which in English means space, matter, and time. This conditions us. When someone gets into our personal space, that conditions our happiness, as an example. The framework I'm going to use is how we can take these same conditions but use them to our advantage. Starting with desha, or space. Space, that is sattvic, helps us to be more integrated, is living in a forest. Space that causes us to be disintegrated is living in a city, that is rajasic. And space that causes destruction is living for money. That is tamasic. So what's the point of all of this? We should be living in such a way where we feel more natural. In terms of space, how to practice being more integrated, live in a space where you feel more natural. Now, thinking of this framework, don't we all feel more natural when we're living in nature? For those who live in small cities and then you go to a big city, it feels way less natural than all of the traffic, all of the cement. Agreed? Then if you go to a stock market, if you go to Las Vegas, where people are living in money, it feels even less natural. It feels like there's even more distraction to one's personality. I was thinking a lot about how much dedication people have to their professional lives and the sacrifice that comes with it. Yesterday, I accidentally shared that some people work 70 hours a day. I obviously meant a week. There's so many young couples, young families that I know that want to live in a city, a metropolitan city. But if you live in such a city, there's so much of expense that comes with it then, correct? Then what do you have to do? Work 70 hours a week. But if you live in a forest, and I don't mean actually in a forest, none of us are smart enough or strong enough to live in a forest, okay? If we live in a simpler city, then you don't have to work for a mortgage, correct? It's a choice that people make to integrate, disintegrate, or destroy. Being very specific about this, every day we should walk in nature. Every day we should sit in nature. That's what we do with our freedom walks and freedom talks and meaningful mornings. And when you're walking in nature, listen to nature. We listen to the news, we listen to gossip, listen to nature. When you're sitting in nature, see nature. In the movie, The Peaceful Warrior, there's one scene where Socrates, who is the guide, shares with Dan, the student, there is never nothing going on. Nature is most interesting. That's desha. So the practice, live in the forest, okay? That's the summary point as you plan tomorrow. Next, I said, is vastu. Another way that we are conditioned, but we're going to use this to our advantage, is vastu means materials or matter. Matter that we need integrates us. Matter that we want disintegrates us. And matter that harms destroys us. Needs, wants, harms. The implication of all of this is for us, in reference to matter, to live more lightly. There's so much emphasis on having a light carbon footprint, correct? There's so much of an emphasis on having or being lighthearted. Yes? You will know that you're practicing integrity when you feel more natural. That's in reference to space. When you feel more light, that's in reference to matter. Today, Sheila and I were having lunch, and I was talking to her about this, and she said, only when one needs this change in their life, they will change their life. If they don't need this, they're not going to change their life. In any direction, anything that's been shared in any happiness series. Think about that. Do you want happiness or do you need happiness? Because as long as we want happiness, this will be a casual affair. But if this becomes a need, we will only have a relationship with matter that is on a needs basis. When I was picking up our kids today, I was thinking about this so intensely, and as I was driving, all of a sudden there was this loud bang on the back window. And in my rearview mirror, I saw that there was 3 teenagers, and they had thrown a snowball at my car while I was driving. But I was thinking about this so much, and I automatically connected this to, what do I need to do right now is keep driving. What do I want to do right now is turn around and teach them Vedanta. And what is going to harm is anything I say or do is going to really be destructive for me and for them. What are 3 random teenagers going to do back to me as I'm lecturing them? What if I throw a snowball at them? And I was amazed at, again, how our relationship with matter is in every direction. So I needed to keep driving to pick up our kids, and that's what I did. And I was so thankful to all of you for giving me this opportunity to think about this. Desha, Vastu, and now Kala. Kala means time. Time can condition us, or we can use this to our advantage. Time that integrates us is time that is devoted. Time that disintegrates us is time that is spent. And time that destroys us is time that is wasted. So devoted, spent, and wasted. How do you know if you're devoting your time? When you become a better person. So then you're all going to ask me, how do you know if you're becoming a better person? When you compare less. When you compare less. Again, talking to Sheila about this. She has, I think, an iPhone 10. I think I have an iPhone 4. Her phone is so much better than mine that she doesn't compare her phone to mine. If you are authentically and deeply becoming a better person, you have no need, you have no want to compare yourself to anyone. Agreed? So integration, I feel more natural, I feel more light, I feel better. Re-emphasizing practical points in regards to vastu. How can one be living by needs rather than wants? My personal experience is to donate as much as you can, give as much as you can. That way you have limited bandwidth that will be directed towards your needs. Just like with time, if you have time to waste, what do? Waste time. If you don't have time to waste, what do? You don't waste time. If you have money to waste, what do? Waste money. But if you don't have money to waste because you've donated all of this, if you've given all of this, then you don't waste money. It helps one to live much more lightly. And in terms of time, how to make a change in our lifestyle, engage in your responsibilities first. And do this with focus. Then the rest of what you have to do, you do later. What do we tend to do? We tend to do the easy work first, correct? Like scrolling down social media, this is my responsibility, Vivekji. I have to know what is happening in other people's lives. How will I live without knowing that? But if you engage in your responsibilities first, and you do this with focus, then You're devoting your time. You will become a better person. One of the questions yesterday was, how do you be less anxious? Finish your responsibilities first. Summarizing, day 2 before we transition into dynamics. Our life, philosophically, is often compared to a pilgrimage. In Sanskrit, this is called a yatra. The word yatra comes from the etymology ya, which means to go. It is not to go externally, but rather to be moved internally. To be more inclusive, to be more integrated. We can move to be more inclusive by associating with noble people's ideas, noble ideas. We can move towards integrity by doing what? By living more naturally, living more lightly, and living in a more devoted way. From discourse to dynamics. Yesterday's dynamics was about space and how our space should be clean, simple, and inspiring. Today's dynamics is going to relate to matter, how this too should be clean, simple, and inspiring. And today's dynamics will be facilitated by Prakash. Prakash is a seeker. And I like to describe those who are facilitating dynamics first as seekers, because I'm sure I can hire a much more knowledgeable and professional, etc., presenter. But that's not what a subjective science is about. It's about being a seeker. So Prakash is a seeker, and he is quite knowledgeable, professional. He has a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, and a PhD in environmental engineering. And I was telling Sheila that Prakash is presenting today, and what's solid about Prakash, one solid aspect about Prakash, many of us get into professions where we know we will be compensated. But to be an environmental engineer, there's a fine possibility one will not be compensated, and not compensated in the way that one should be. That shows a lot of dedication and sacrifice, yes? Prakash, continue.
Thank you, Vivekji, and thanks to all for being part of the dynamic portion of tonight's workshop. Last month at the Chinmaya Setukari Wellness Workshop Series, I had a wonderful opportunity to share my personal story of various actions that I and my family have taken to reduce our impact on the environment over the last 3 decades, starting with choosing my major, environmental engineering, pursuing a career in controlling air pollution, always getting a house or apartment close to where I worked, so close enough that I could ride my bike to work. When we had young children, infants and toddlers, we would buy them toys and furniture from consignment sales. Eventually we downsized. We first grew the size of our house, kind of keeping up with the Joneses, but then eventually downsized significantly to reduce the amount of airspace that we were heating and cooling in our home in North Carolina. And then eventually moved to Kathmandu, Nepal, for 3 years, where we lived on almost a zero carbon footprint, then moved on to India, tried it there as well, and eventually came back to the US 4 years ago. And personally, I began lobbying Congress for effective action to reverse climate change. If you're interested in hearing this story. It was quite inspiring to tell it and for others to hear it. I encourage you to watch that on YouTube. But today's workshop isn't about my story. Today's workshop is all about this community, this Chinmaya mission community. And at the end of the talk last month that I gave, Vivekji announced that in 2022, next year, our Chinmaya Setukari community in North America will commune to support the earth, the environment, and the climate through what we're calling Prithvi Seva Sangha. So we're graduating from Satsang to Seva Sang, which is doing noble actions together. And the Prithvi Seva Sangh will be taking action towards the protection of our environment, both through financial donations and fundraising to support environmental actions, as well as through taking physical actions that will improve our stewardship of the environment ourselves. Today, I'm going low tech, and rather than using slides, I made this Venn diagram. Let's see if we can see this. Yes. No. Okay. So yeah, I want everyone to imagine this Venn diagram. I won't have it up for long. So just keep in mind that we have two circles. On the left is a circle of things that make me happy. Since this is the happiness workshop series, that's very important. And it's important for other reasons, as Vivekji just alluded. On the right is the things that are good for the earth. So for Prithvi, okay? And today's dynamic session is about, well, first of all, we can all think of items that fit on this side of the diagram, things that make us happy but aren't good for the environment. Coming to my mind are living in a very large house, driving a luxury vehicle that emits like a lot of, uses up a lot of gas, or maybe even going on a luxurious cruise vacation, right? So those would be things out on this end of the diagram. There might be other items on this side, but what we want to talk about is everything in the middle, because if it's good for the environment, but doesn't make us happy, then we're less likely to do it. And so today's activity is to try to grow this intersection of the Venn diagram. How we're going to do that in this workshop is to try to collectively produce a document of actions that we all can and will take in order to be better stewards of the environment. And as this is the dynamic part of the workshop, it's going to require your active participation. Before we all start participating, I want to lay out a few ground rules. The first is that everybody who's joining from Zoom will need to have your chat window open. So make sure my chat window is open. The second is that I only want you to type into the chat window when it is your turn. Okay, so now you can type your answer, but don't hit enter until your turn is called. And I promise that everyone will get a turn. The third rule is that when it is not your turn, I want you to break the golden rule and actually multitask. Be doing two things at once. I want you to be, number one, thinking about your response to the prompt, and also reading what others are typing into the chat. Because that leads me to the fourth and final ground rule, which is the most important, that only unique answers are allowed in the chat. So if somebody has already typed it in before you, I don't want you to type that in. So be thinking about unique answers. And if your turn comes very late and you don't have anything to share, that's okay. You don't have to answer every single prompt. But it's important to be reading what others write, because those ideas hopefully will inspire your actions as well. Okay. So what are these actions that we're going to be talking about? I was driving home from work today, and on the radio, I heard a statistic that 70% of US gross domestic product, GDP, is driven by consumption. And I imagine in Canada, it's very close to 70% as well. And so there are many ways that we can reduce or improve our relationship with the environment. We can, change to lower wattage light bulbs and drive fewer miles, and these are things that many of us have thought about, maybe are even taking action on. But today's recommendations, today's topic, the theme of the actions that I want to talk about today, and I want you all to think about, is how we can reduce our consumption, because consumption drives the vast majority of our environmental problems, not just climate change, because when any goods are produced, there's a lot of greenhouse gas emissions that go into the production of that, but also in terms of resource depletion. Any clothing has to be made from a variety of natural resources. Goods, any automobiles or electronics, they require the mining of precious metals and so forth. And so I'm going to post in the chat 2 items that we don't have time to look at today, but one is a recommended reading and one is a recommended viewing. So for those that aren't into reading full-length books, I highly recommend the 20-minute video there in the chat called The Story of Stuff, which talks about the entire process of from production to consumption that's driving our economy, but it's also harming our environment tremendously. Okay, so let's get into the dynamic part. The first prompt is to borrow instead of buy. Borrow instead of buy. And for this, I want to tell a brief story, which is that a couple months ago, we were at, we'd gone to San Diego to attend my wife's stepsister's wedding. My wife had been given the job of preparing the flower garland that the bride and the 2 garlands that the bride and groom would be putting on each other. And she spent the morning taking whatever the flowers that my mother-in-law had prepared and the string, and trying to string them through, but the garland kept on breaking. And she went on YouTube and found out that what this really needs is fishing wire. And of course, our in-laws, they don't fish, and so we had no fishing wire, and time was running out. The garland had already broken a couple of times, and there wasn't really enough. By the time I got on the scene, which was of course very late, there was no time to go to the store and get the fishing wire. But it dawned on me in the urgency of the moment that, well, I don't have to go all the way to Target or Walmart. Maybe I can just go to a neighbor's house. And I walked out in the street, looked for whoever's house had the garage door open. In California, everyone has garages. And I just walked over there and knocked on the door. And within minutes, I was back in the house with a line of fishing wire. We tied the garlands. We strung all the garlands, and the rest is history. The event was a success. Now, I wasn't thinking of borrowing that fishing wire because of the carbon footprint that would be involved in driving to and from the store and producing the fishing wire. But it did turn out that had, that would have been fishing wire that would have sat in my father-in-law's garage until he threw it out. It wouldn't have gotten used for hardly anything else unless someone else needed a garland. And so with that story and that introduction, I'm going to enter in the first prompt. And there it is. Floss can work too. In the chat, think of something that you are planning to buy, but that you can borrow instead. So it's something that you are planning to buy, not something that you theoretically or hypothetically could borrow, but you don't even want it. And now, remember whoa, stop typing. Remember the ground rules. Only type into the chat when it is your turn, okay? And so we will start by respecting our elders and answer this now. If you were born before 1960, and everybody else multitask, be reading the items in the chat while thinking also about what you're going to borrow instead of buy. And now the last group. Reminder, if you don't have something to add, you don't have to answer this prompt, but try to keep your answers restricted to unique items. I'm seeing a couple of snow blowers. So again, I didn't call your group. Okay. Okay, I think we've covered everybody. And if something comes to mind before I enter the second prompt, you can feel free to type it in the chat. But remember the ground rules. Types only enter things that you haven't seen others include already. While we transition to the second prompt, I'm reminded of a second story. Before going to this wedding 2 months ago in San Diego, I realized, or Nita realized, that I didn't have dress shoes that were appropriate for the occasion. And the shoes that I have, I'm comfortable wearing them to work, and I don't envision going for any fancy interviews or very many weddings either. And so I decided, let me not go out and buy a new pair of dress shoes, but rather borrow them. But whom to borrow them from? I don't even know who has the same shoe size as me. So I just went onto WhatsApp and sent a message to a group of dads that I engage with, saying, this is my shoe size, and I just want to borrow a pair of shoes for this wedding. And the group only has maybe 15 or so dads, but within a day, I had 2 offers for shoes, and they sent me pictures of the shoes. I went out to a friend's house whom I hadn't even interacted with for months because of the pandemic, and borrowed the shoes. Had a nice chat with him and his wife, and then after the wedding, I had, of course, to go back and return the shoes. And at that time, I ended up having brunch with him and his family and his parents who were visiting from out of town. And all of that connection wouldn't have happened if I hadn't gone through the act of borrowing. So, number one, in our society, we need to destigmatize borrowing and asking for help, but then also recognize the advantage of it, the connections that take place when we do that. All right, so that's borrow. The second prompt for tonight is to repair instead of replace. Jen Hatmaker, the author of Seven, uses the phrase that we need to be more materialistic. And that seems to be counter to this. But what she means is that we need to buy things that will last, fewer, better things, or buy less, but buy smart, are other ways that others have referred to this. In Nepal, I had kind of, again, forced into the situation of repairing instead of replacing, because in the market, we couldn't get the products that we were used to. For example, I had a windbreaker that I brought over from North Carolina. Vivekji has worn this windbreaker. It's a fluorescent green one. And I had it for a few years, but the zipper broke. And of course, I couldn't get that windbreaker replaced, and so I gave it to our yard manager, our gardener, and he took it out to a shop, and for 50 cents or 60 cents, the equivalent of, he got it repaired. Over here in the U.S., it's not so easy to find repair technicians. Sometimes repairing things cost almost as much as buying a new one, but maybe we need to think a little bit broader about the cost of the product, the replacement of the product, because what's not included in that cost is, of course, all the negative externalities, the carbon that's emitted to the atmosphere, the climate change that it causes, as well as the resource reduction, depletion that we talked about earlier. And so for our second prompt, I'm going to type it into the chat. And this time I'll try not to leave anyone out. Make sure I'm typing to everyone. Think of something that you own that is breaking down. Type that item in the chat as your commitment to at least trying to repair it instead of replacing it. Okay? That means you would have to go through the activity of seeing if you can find somebody who can repair it if you're not able to repair it yourself. Let's begin, and this time we will respect not our elders, but our tallers. Let's start with the tallest members of our group. And while we're waiting for their answers, think of your own response. You can type it in now, but don't hit enter until you're called on to do so. Okay, let's grow this category. Answer now if you're 5'9" or above. (5'6" and above. (5'3" and above. Love it. Yeah, furniture can be repaired. Yes. Torn comforter. And last category, shorter than 5'3", or anybody that missed your turn. Awesome. There are so many things that we can look out for to see if we can get them repaired instead of replacing them. I saw a lot of clothing, and I wanted to mention I heard on the same radio program today evening that both Levi's jeans and Patagonia are changing their business model to be predominantly repurposed clothing and less firsthand clothing. So there is a movement in a few sectors of the apparel industry, which is totally driven by overconsumption. Okay. I am going to put the last prompt up. This one, I'm not going to go in order by category, but this was a little bit harder for me to think about. That is, think about things that, put it in the chat. Think of something unique that you own, which others in your community might benefit from using occasionally, okay? So this should be something that not everybody has one. And type that item in the chat if you're willing to lend it to your friends and family, and even maybe bonus points if you would advertise your its availability to your community and say, hey, if you ever want to borrow a carom board, I've got one. Yeah. And this time you can answer all together because I've run out of my time. Tents, power washers, awesome. Karaoke machine, I'd love to borrow your karaoke machine. And so as you read these responses and as you type them into the chat, remember, try to make a mental commitment to advertise the availability of this item to people within your locality. So close by, not, you don't want to be shipping your carom board across the country for lending. All right. With that, I will thank you all for your participation and the dynamic portion of this workshop. Hari Om.
I had shared with all of you that the typical person and people we interact with are instinctive. When you want something, buy it. And the culture of this workshop is to remember, is to practice, to be intentional. And I feel what Prakash shared, even though he is very knowledgeable, I talked about all of his degrees, but he made us all think about what we take for granted and what we should be grateful for. And I think the most important part of what has been shared, and if we could just count how many comments have been shared, it would be huge. It would take me forever to go through all of these comments. Practice this. The Happiness Theory series is not to be theoretical. I've already shared that this is not a ritual which someone else can do by proxy, that every one of us should try to practice this. In yesterday's dynamics, you were asked to take a before photograph and an after photograph. How many of you did this? What would be fascinating is to take another photograph right now, where the after becomes the before again. If you have done this, make sure that you email this to our team, because we'll put this together, at least for my enjoyment, and perhaps we'll share this with everyone. And in today's dynamics, Prithvi Seva Sangha. How thoughtfully what was shared is we have to evolve from Satsanga to Seva Sangha. We have to make ourselves strong enough to be able to share that. And that is going to be the focal point of our community for 2022. Is for all of us to associate with this feeling of serving our mother. We all have the same mother. We call her Prithvi, we call her Earth. So please stay tuned to this and keep reflecting on how our community can serve our mother. We all have lots of ideas, and listening to Prakash share in such simple and supportive ways, if we just acted on this, there would be such a difference that our community would be making. From discourse to dynamics to dialogue, we're continuing using Slido. Everyone check Slido out. This was emailed to you. This is in the chat. Ask your questions. Vote for which questions you want to be asked or answered. And my request to all of you, before I continue, how many of you we have physically never met before by a show of hands? Physically, we have never met before. Okay? How many of you, this is your first happiness series ever? Physically. I don't need your digital hands, just your physical hands. Okay. I often share with our community that you should be open with yourself and respectful to others. So as questions are being asked, be respectful to others. And if you have a question, be open about this. I am moving to Slido. From Ramesh, who is joining us from Portland. Do we look for noble people, or do we happen to come across one? How does one get the association Does it have to be two-way? The more sincere you are about being independently joyous, the more you will attract that in the multiverse. For those who are in our Upanishad course, I've often shared, the more sincere a disciple is, the more sincere a guide will come into their life. So it is your sincerity to need inclusivity, and the multiverse will arrange itself for that inclusivity, that nobility to come to you. The lower perspective here, should you look for this? You should look for people who smile more. You should look for people who laugh more. You should look for people who are living more independently and listen carefully to them. Find out what makes them different than everyone else. And most likely, it is because of satsanga. And in satsanga, there's no barriers to entry. Are there any barriers to entry to be part of this workshop? None. That's the greatness of satsanga, so you be part of that also. Next, Anonymous, from Anonymous. I understand these satsangs in theory, but there's so much noise around me from life situations, medical issues, work that I can't seem to evolve, and I am exhausted. How many of you can relate to this question? A lot. Everything that is shared in the happiness series is not theoretical. I don't like talking about myself, but I've actively, consciously tried to talk about myself just to show you how experiential this is. Right down to, I wanted to turn around and educate those teenagers about snowballs. This is not theoretical. And we have to shift our mentality from theory to application so that whatever you're experiencing in terms of negativity, that will slowly be dismantled. Let me put this in a simpler way. How many of you exercised today? By show of hands, you exercised today. How many of you know that you should exercise every day? By a show of hands. All of us know that, correct? We all know we should exercise, but how many of us are ready to devote time to exercising? That's an investment. If you start to apply what is being shared in satsang, you will be less exhausted. You'll be physically healthier, mentally healthier, and even the challenges that come to you from this multiverse, you'll accept them more and reject them less. But one has to start to practice. Next, Richa from Toronto. I think there's so many Richas. In corporate world, universities, extrovert traits are rewarded. How do we change this so introverts get rewarded and share more of their noble ideas? It starts with people talking about how important happiness is as compared to position, possession, and pleasure. Yesterday's dynamics about space management, today's dynamics about matter management, we have to talk about this more. We have to talk about mental health more. We have to talk about gender identity more. Because the more that we talk about this, the more this is normalized. What's normal for us? Position, possession, pleasure. This is normal. This is why we talk about it. But if we start to talk about peace more, this will be normalized, and introverts will be supported. Introverts will be rewarded. So talk about this more. Be that pioneer who is secure enough, feels included enough to include others who don't talk as much, who are more shy, etc., etc., etc. The lower perspective on this is if you're able to have two types of reward systems. One reward system is the one that's typical where extroverts are rewarded, but if you can put your foot in the door to reward those who come up with ways to encourage equity, diversity, and inclusion, as an example, change the culture of a corporation, of a university, and so on. You start in a small way, but that will slowly grow then to involve those facets. And if all of us remember, culture is not intrinsic to any material. This home that you see, the culture of this home is not based on the bricks and mortar. It's not based on the soil and the windows. It's based on the people. It's based on the humans. We can create and recreate culture. It starts with people. So be that person then. Next, Deepal from College Station. What is the best way to teach kids about happiness so they don't have to unlearn as much as we do? That's a fine question. Everyone start to answer? I'm sure you have lots of answers. How would you answer Deepal's question? Smile more. Send them to Bolivar, enroll them in happy hour. So many of these are, give them to someone else. Get a consultant to address them. Until high school, one's greatest role model is their parents. Whether they're good parents or bad parents, and here I mean this, whether they're parents that know what's important or parents that don't know what's important, one's greatest role model is their parents. So whatever culture a parent has in their mind, that culture is going to be developed in a home. With our children, they always see me writing in my planner, so now they have their own planners too. Vyasa has the 2010 planner and Shuka has the 2011 planner. So when I write in my planner, they write in their planners also. See how that exposure has an effect. So it starts with the parents. A lower perspective here is find social circles where the rest of the community is making happiness important. I've shared many times when I cross borders to come to America or Trinidad, etc. They'll ask me, where are you going? And I'll tell them, I'm going to be with family friends. And that border agent doesn't understand. What's a family friend? You all understand what a family friend is, yes? My parents are friends with them, so naturally their kids and I have become friends too. So now, if I become friends with, I'm just going to name Sheila. If I become friends with Sheila and she makes happiness important and I make happiness important, then naturally our kids will have a greater propensity for that. So now my kids are hanging out with kids who make happiness more important. And that's what I talked about yesterday, that you are in charge, you are in control of who your friends are. Don't play the weakness card. With family, it's less black and white, but with friends, it is black and white. Don't let anyone waste your time, waste your effort. Next, Anonymous from Anonymous. How can one handle when you get cheated on by a family member who you trusted wholly? How to internalize and move ahead from this experience? This is a very difficult experience, which I sympathize with. I'm actively not using the word empathize because I've not experienced this. It has thus far been my good fortune to not have experienced this, and I hope you haven't either. The higher perspective is to be independent in every which way. Pujaswami Chinmaya has shared, don't keep the key to your happiness in someone else's pocket. Certainly we have to interdepend on people. I'm interdepending on my crew right now to facilitate Zoom, YouTube, etc., but I don't depend on them for content. That would be dangerous for you. It would be dangerous for me. There is a line between interdependence and independence. So we should interdepend, but not depend. Emotionally, we should not depend. It doesn't matter how close one is. And again, Pujaswami Chinmayananda has shared, this journey or yatra we're on, this journey is to be practiced or traveled alone. Do you know when Alexander was dying, he shared with his ministers, when you carry me through the streets, make sure people can see my hands. Can you all show me how his hands were when his body was dead? Completely empty. That's why I don't even call him Alexander the Great. That is a very wrong adjective to use. He left with nothing externally, and he left with a lot of negativity internally. So do not depend internally on any entity. Even in a subjective science like Vedanta and happiness, even one's guide, even one's God is not to be emotionally, one is not to be emotionally dependent on them. The lower perspective to this is over-communicate. Over-communicate. With the coronavirus, with technology, our default has become to under-communicate. Just because you text a lot, just because you use Instagram a lot, doesn't mean that you're communicating, correct? There's information exchange, but that's very different than communication. Like right now, I'm answering a question, but for some of you, what's going on in your minds right now? Blah, 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 correct? So there's a difference. One should over-communicate about how you feel, what your family member has made you feel, what your expectations are of them, because maybe they don't know how much they've hurt you. And if you over-communicate, maybe this can be a teaching experience for them and certainly for you also. Over-communicate. Next, Anonymous from Anonymous. How to tackle situations where a lot of negativity is created through verbal dialogue, and yet you're trying to reach a solution where all involved are at peace. So I retake back everything I just said about over-communication. The higher perspective. Throughout Bhagavad-Gita, and for those who joined me for Meaningful Mornings, you would have tuned into this. Sri Krishna is perpetually sharing with Prince Arjuna to be balanced. People, half of people are going to like you, and half of people are going to dislike you, whether they're related to you or not, whether they claim to be your friends or not. And the more acutely aware you are of that, then when you make a decision, all of the negativity that comes from that decision, courtesy of others, you will absorb that. You will continue to be balanced with that. As simple as the majority, maybe not you, But the majority of people who know about the happiness series, what do they want? A recording. The recording is not available on YouTube right now, today, nor tomorrow, nor the day after, nor the day after that. Everyone is sharing the recording. How dare you not share your recording? We just have to absorb that, because our culture is for this to be active, for you to be here, to be now. And you just absorb that. The lower perspective here is pick and choose when you want to push your decisions through. You cannot have everything the way that you want it. You have to be balanced in your approach, that some things will happen your way and some things will not happen your way. It's like the question yesterday about accepting versus expecting. The one who lives by expectation is someone who's controlling. They want everything to go their way. But for those who are practicing acceptance, then they know that micromanaging doesn't work. Everything is not going to go their way. And the last question. Wow, Anonymous got a lot of votes. You got 3 questions in a row. How to fulfill our dharma towards aging parents as they become difficult, leaning towards unhealthy lifestyle, excessive use of technology, combative temper, etc. A higher perspective is, if they're aging, enjoy being with them. You're not going to change them. Think about how hard it is for you to change yourself. And the questioner clearly is not an aging parent because they have a reference for an aging parent, correct? My father is a trained Vedanta teacher, and I remember one day us talking, and he was sharing with me how much harder it is for him to change than it is for me to change. I think his point is that I should change. I think that was the point that he was trying to make. But we both have the same training. He has way more experience than me, but how hard it is for him to change because he's older than me. Now I think of our older son Vyasa, who's 4.5. He is slowly calling me Pitashri. He grew up calling me Appa, but through intense training, he is now calling me Pitashri. But my point, how easy it is for him to change, correct? So enjoy your relationship with your aging parents. Don't try to change them. Just enjoy them being your parents and you being their child. The lower perspective is anything you want them to change, make sure you're there doing that with them. If they're addicted to WhatsApp and you're sitting there being equally addictive, then that doesn't work. Take them for a walk. Do something to wean them off whatever you feel is unhealthy for them. The problem with Slido is that it's like karma. It never ends. We started with 12 questions. Now we have 19 questions. Who knows how many questions are going to be there tomorrow and the day after, but we'll keep trying. We continue with our dialogue, some announcements, and then we'll start to debrief about our rad, your rad, my rad. In yesterday's announcements, I asked all of you to like and follow Chinmaya Mission Niagara's Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter accounts, and many of you did act on this. I also shared about our Live Vedanta podcast. I'm making a further request of all of you. Please rate and review this podcast. You can rate it in whatever number you want. Any number you want, you can rate it out of, okay? And review this also, as well as Chinmaya Mission Niagara's webcast, which is our YouTube channel. The recordings for this happiness series will be released on January 1. So as soon as I'm done speaking, YouTube is finished for this day. On January 1, this will be released for everyone to tune into the recording. And I hope you understand and appreciate why we don't share the recording every day. Do you know how many people would be on Zoom if the recording was available right now? How many? Less than half. And how beautiful that today we had 160 people, of which, again, just the last 2 rows, which is around 20 screens, don't have their cameras on. You are being engaged in an active way, which I'm very appreciative of. The announcements for today. Our community, our crew, very much understands and appreciates what the original social media is, which is books. We have produced and released 5 books over the last, I want to say, 2 years. These books are, please listen carefully because they're all very useful. Chronologically, Life Lessons. Life Lessons is a curriculum for high school students that our exploring and evolving adults have produced. What I find so fascinating is that the majority of high school classes in our self-development organizations are taught by those who were never born and never grew up here in North America. Isn't that fascinating? But that's what makes this curriculum so powerful, is that the exploring and evolving adults who were born and raised in North America develop this curriculum. Life Lessons. Next is Traditions. Simple meals for mindful living. When I was in university, the primary source of nutrition for me was my roommates. They cooked, I cleaned. It's sort of like my present circumstance also. The roommate I married, she cooks, I clean. But this is much healthier. We can all cook and eat in a more mindful way, and that's what Traditions is about. This is a great gift for those who are instinctive in terms of cooking and eating, is our Traditions book. Next, the Reflection Adventure of the Week Workbook. In this book, every week you're given a way to practice, and you have to document this, correct? It's like people who take certain tests and they have to write down their symptoms or their changes, but to do this with your own mind. The Raw Workbook. Next is Prince Arjuna's questions. Do you know how many questions Prince Arjuna asks in Bhagavad-Gita? We all have so much respect for Bhagavad-Gita, but the flow of Bhagavad-Gita is really facilitated by Prince Arjuna. And so we have documented all of his questions and how his questions and Sri Krishna's answers relate to us in modern times, in 2020, 2021, 2022, forever. And our most recent book is The Seeker's Wordbook. This is a book to encourage clarity. From clarity, what comes? Conviction. What comes with conviction? Confidence. Very good, as is being shared. Clarity. The Seeker's Wordbook helps us to be clear about philosophy and how to practice this. So all of these books, these details are being shared in the chat, and they will also be shared in the emails coming to you. It's all on Chinmaya Mission Niagara's website. And this is my transition to our RAD. Our reflection adventure of the day from yesterday was for you to analyze, do you spend or devote your resources? Tell me, do you spend or devote your resources? Remember, I said you had to be open. There's an awesome band and song. The band is called Extreme, and the song is called More Than Words. It is very different to say that I'm devoted to sharing than to act on sharing. Saying I love you and then acting on I love you, those are very different. Every possession we buy really adds to pollution. So reflect on the why. Here is your rad for today. On Chinmaya Mission Niagara's website, there is a section called Featured Posts. Featured Posts. I want you to read those featured posts. Because today was about evolving from Satsanga to Seva Sangha. Do read this. I'm going to quiz you on this tomorrow. Shanti, Shanti, Shantihi. Be safe, be sound, be serene, be happiness.